I didn't know where I was at. I woke up in this room. I was looking up at a false ceiling, much like this. And all of a sudden, to me, I recognized, I was in a different room. Where am I at? I don't know where I'm at. And all of a sudden, I looked up at the ceiling again. I was laying in the bed, faced up, and the ceiling started coming down to me. From my perspective, the ceiling was coming down. Well, it wasn't coming down. I was going up. The ceiling was getting closer and closer. The ceiling wasn't moving. I was moving out. My spirit came up and out of my body. Then when I was up a certain height, different level, all of a sudden I went down, boom, to the foot of the bed. I turned around and I looked back in the bed, and we'll just assume the bed was going this way now for the sake of the looking at. I looked in the bed, and there underneath the blankets was the figure of somebody's feet under there. I went a little further, and I could look up here a little more, and there was somebody's knees, and somebody's hips, somebody's shoulders, and somebody's face. It was my face. My body was in the bed. I was in the bed, but I'm out here. But my body's in there. How can this be? 15 years old, nobody told me about this, see? Nobody told me about what happens when you die. So, what are you going to hear tonight? What are you going to hear? Well, you're going to hear about a young man who attended church. At the age of 15, he had attended church as much as he knew how to attend church, as much every Sunday as anyone that I knew of. You're going to hear about how he grew up in a Christian home. Mom and Dad were Christians. You're going to hear how he grew up and went to a denominational church and did all the things that he was told to do, that type of thing, that what he understood to do. And you're going to hear about what happened to him after he had gotten spinal meningitis and died. Tonight you're also going to hear about the reality of heaven and hell. A lot of times nowadays, people are trying to say or trying to tell you that there is no hell. Especially in different religions or cultures and foreign religions, or I shouldn't say foreign, but I should say other than Christian religions especially, some of them don't talk about hell. There's a transformation, there's a soul sleep, there's different types of things that they believe happen. Tonight I want to share what I experienced, and I hope it changes your reality or that question. If you have a question about whether there's a heaven or hell, I hope it erases that, so you will know that there is. Yeah. And then the other thing, the third thing that's going to happen and take place also, is that you're going to see, and I believe that God has a plan and a purpose for each and every single one of us here. He had a plan and purpose for me I didn't know anything about. Nobody had told me about it. But he had a plan and purpose for me, and he showed me what it was, and we'll tell you about it in just a little bit. But on the other hand, he's got a plan and purpose for you. And it's up to you, and you will be responsible to find out what it is, and then to fulfill it. That's part of life. That's part of why we're here. See? Because living on earth is a test. Yeah. That's what it's all about. I know, going through grade school, high school, college, who likes a test? Who loves a test? Is there anybody here that loves a test in high school and college and all that? Well, there were some, and they were usually English majors. That's what I'll say. In college where I was at, they loved it. I mean, they loved to write and different things like that. But anyway, that's just my own experience. But anyway, most of us don't like tests. But it proves to us what we know and what we don't know. And in the case of a teacher, it proves to her or him what we know or don't know. In the case with God, God already knows our heart. He doesn't need a test to show us what's in our heart. We need the test so we can see what's in our heart. Because we think everything's honky-dory. We think everything's wonderful. We think we are the greatest thing around. We don't have any pride within us. We don't have any of this other junk or different things within us. You know, we don't have any bitterness or resentment within us. We don't have any unforgiveness in us. Come on. And then all of a sudden something happens. And we go through a little bit of a test. And then all of a sudden it's like our hearts are just opened up. And it reveals to us what's in our hearts. And so God allows those tests to come by our way, see, so that we can see what's in our heart. So tonight you're going to be tested. You'll be challenged. You'll be questioned. You'll be asked. And so you're going to go through a test tonight. And you'll have to answer. And even your no answer, none, no activity, not answering is an answer. Because it's a no. All right? All right? Hallelujah. Well, just give you a little bit of history. As I'd mentioned a little bit before, I had my parents were both born again, John and Caroline. And we lived in a small area south of Beersford. I grew up on a farm south of Beersford. We had a ranch there. We had, if you want to call it that, farm ranch. We had pasture for the cattle, and we had also horses, quite a few horses, and all kinds of livestock that we had, and we farmed quite a few acres and that type of thing. So I grew up on the farm and went to a country church, and a wonderful church. I loved it and loved the people there and that type of thing. Good people. A lot of them were relatives or people that we knew, that type of thing. My folks grew up there. I mean, my mom's, and that was her home church from her birth and that type of thing. My dad also, after he married my mom, that's where we had started, and he raised our family. And I've got, actually, I got 3 brothers. I usually don't say it that way, but I got 3 brothers. And I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But anyway, that's where I started. And another thing where I started was this. So at my birth, it was a little bit unusual. My mom had had 3 boys before I was time for me to come along. And the first son that she had, they named Robert. And then the second son was John Carroll, and the third son was John Doug. Well, you'd say, why would you name 2 kids in your family with the same first name? Well, the second child died. So I have 3 brothers. One's in heaven already, but I got 2 here on this earth. So anyway, the second one died, and lasted about a couple days. And so my mom had to have a cesarean. And when she came along with the third child, my other brother John, then she had to have another cesarean. And then now at the age of 42, she was pregnant with me. And so 42 is getting a little bit older, you know, but you have to remember now, this was back in the 50s. This is not today. This is back in the 50s. And so she was a little bit worried about this, about having her third cesarean. And she was concerned because she'd already had 1 child die after a couple days. And so then what didn't happen, or didn't help matters, was that she was listening one night, the night before the surgery the next day, my birth the next day, she was listening to 2 nurses talking in the hallway. And they didn't know that she could hear them. And they were talking about tomorrow's surgery. And they started to comment about, you know, she's 42 years old. This is going to be her third cesarean. This is pretty serious, we hope. You know, and she already had 1 child die, and so now we're hoping, you know, things are going to be okay. You know, well, that didn't help her confidence, anything. And so as a Christian, as loving God, she went to her Savior. She went and prayed to Jesus, and she said, I'm desperate. I want this child to live. And so she said, if this child will live, I'll dedicate him to you, Lord. I'm going to give his life to you. And so that night she went to sleep, and during the night the Lord gave her a dream. And there were 3 things that the Lord showed her, just in a real short little snippets. And the first thing was that she saw herself in a hospital bed nursing a live child. And so that told her, I gave her a confirmation that this child was going to be born alive. And then the next one was that she saw a young boy walking in a town, shopping with her, walking. So he must have been, you know, older. He was probably 4 or 5 years old. So she knew that she had a live birth. It was a son, and he's going to live up to 4 or 5 at least, right? Then the next thing that she had gotten from the Lord was that on the incision, right where the surgery was going to take place with the cesarean, then right at the top, she saw that there wasn't a healing that taking place. It was healed all the way up here, but not here. And so then she woke up. The next day, I was born, and then she went home, and everything was fine. And then she came back to the doctor a week or so later, and just for the checkup time, regular checkup. And so she went in to see the doctor, and he said, well, how's everything? Everything's fine, except, well, there's a little bit right up here where the incision was for the cesarean, and she said that it's not healed up there. Well, then he looked at it, and he could see with the tape and everything that she had not been peeling it back, and said, well, it hadn't been peeled back. You haven't peeled it back. And she said, no, how'd you know? He said, well, the Lord told me. And so he opened it up, and sure enough, there it was. It wasn't healed. They put a little salve on there, and everything was just fine. But he said, well, I guess the Lord did tell you, didn't he? And so that's how I got started. That's how I was dedicated to the Lord and for his purpose. Now, I didn't know about this, what I just got done telling you. I didn't know about this until after I'd gone in the ministry. She'd kept these things and hidden them in her heart. She'd not told anybody. You know, sometimes you dedicate your children to the Lord, and then you hope they stay home. Yeah. So she never told me until after we had gone in the ministry, and my wife and family and things like that. And then she said, well, you know, this is a fulfillment of what I had prayed about over you before you were born. And I was all ears, and so I listened to what she had said. And so that's how I got started. Then I grew up, just normal childhood and stuff like that, but one day in 1967, sorry. In December, we went to go and change the cattle from one field to the other. We lived on the farm. We had stock cattle. We put them in the stocks to clean it out. And it was an open winter. We didn't have any snow in December. That was kind of wild and crazy. So then we were making use of that, and we chased the cattle or herded them to another stock field over about 5 miles away. During this time, I put on a light jacket. You know, it wasn't too bad out. It was a pretty good, nice, warm day. The sun was there, and all of a sudden, on the route there and the cattle herding that we did, trail that we took, all of a sudden the weather started to change. And the clouds started to roll in. The wind picked up. It started to mist. And that mist, it got colder and colder, and it turned into snow. And by the time we got over to the other end and where we wanted to get the cattle at, I was just froze stiff because I was on the horse. I was the one riding the horse. And so I was just froze. I jumped in the pickup, and the horse knew the way home, so we took off the bridle and saddle and just gave her a slap, and boom, she was home, you know, that type of thing. And so I took off, jumped in the pickup, tried to turn on the heater and keep that warmed up that way, and then I got home, and I was just sick. I was just I just didn't feel good, just right away. I just went straight to bed. I was just all chilled. And so I just progressively got worse. I got to have a fever the next day, and I was not doing well. Then I lost consciousness. I didn't know where I was at. I didn't know what I was saying. There was things that I was saying. They told me later on that were not cool. They were not good. They were not holy. And but I was not feeling well, and I was talking out of my head. The last thing that I remember at home was that I just had to go to the restroom, and so I jumped out of bed and I ran to the bathroom, came back out, and I was standing looking into our kitchen. And in the kitchen there was Mom, and there was my brother John and his wife Betty, and their newborn baby Aaron. And there they were on the kitchen table, and they were all admiring the baby. You know how you do that. And this is the first time Mom had seen the baby because they had been down in Texas. And down in Texas they had an outbreak of spinal meningitis down there at San Antonio at boot camp, and that's where John had been. And so the last thing I remember is, boom, I was just fainted right there. And I don't remember anything until 5 days later when I woke up in the hospital. During that time, when they carried me back to the bed, they called the local doctor in Alcester, and they did doctor calls, or house calls, I should say, at that time. And so he came out, and he checked me over and just thought I had a bad case of the flu or different things and a cold and all these different things, although I had a high fever. So he gave me a shot of penicillin and then went back, you know, and then the next day I just got worse. The fever went up. I was talking again out of my head. I didn't recognize people. I was saying things, doing things that were not normal, not good, not nice. And so they called the doctor again. He came back, he examined me again, and he gave me another shot of penicillin, and he said, you better take me to the hospital right away. So my folks put me in the car and drove up to, at the time it's called Sioux Valley Hospital in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And they admitted me there, and the doctors started to perform a diagnostic check. And they came through, and during the time they did a spinal tap. And on the spinal tap, you're supposed to be still and quiet and calm, and I was writhing, and I didn't want to be there, and they put me in the bed, and they had to hold me down. And what they did actually they had leather straps that they put on my hands and my wrists and tied me down into the bed, both of my hands, and they tied me down in the bed with wrist straps around my feet. And then they because I was writhing and just 15 years old, and I was on the farm, I was very fit, where, you threw bales all summer, and you worked, and you wrangled the cattle and all that type of stuff. And so I just wanted to get out of there. I didn't want to be there. And so I was writhing up and down. So they went and even put a sheet around my stomach to hold me down in bed. And then they had an IV in my arm, so I was supposed to be still and quiet, And all this was going on at the same time. They were trying to give me a spinal tap. And they found out that when they did draw out the fluid of the spine, which is supposed to be clear, it's supposed to be nice and clear, it was almost like cream in consistency. It was infected so badly. And so they knew the spinal meningitis, it progresses, and it goes up your spine, and finally it progresses until it gets into your brain. And basically what it does is you get an infection and a fever, so high a fever that it burns out your brain cells, and then you die. And that's the normal process if things don't turn around, don't change. And so for whatever days I was in the hospital there, on the 5th day, the doctors finally came to my folks, talked to them out in the hallway, and they said this. I said, we don't know if your son's going to make it through the night. If he does, the fever is so progressed and has burned out a lot of his brain cells, we estimate he's going to be a vegetable. So we don't know if he's going to make it. We give him a 50-50 chance if he's going to make it through the night. What's that do to your parents? Looking at it from their perspective, how does that shake them up? I mean, can you imagine? 5 days ago, this young man, 15 years old, is well, totally healed, nothing wrong, and all of a sudden, it's a shock. Right out in the hallway, the doctor's starting to talk to you and say, I don't think he's going to make it. 5 days ago, he was well. See, life can change so quickly. Life changes. Yeah. Life changes. Things can happen. Traumas happen to us. And at the age of 15, see, I thought I was going to live forever. I didn't think I was going to get spinal meningitis and die. I was thinking, hoping, man, I had a lot of my life ahead of me. And yet right now, and I didn't even know this happened. They told me all these things later. I didn't know these things happened. I was gone. And so they prayed. My folks prayed. They went to the church. They had people at the church praying. As well as they knew how. They prayed. They prayed for healing. Now, so then the next thing that happened that night, to me, that's when things started. I fainted at home 5 days before, and now I woke up in the hospital. I didn't know where I was at. I woke up in this room. I was looking up at a false ceiling, much like this, and all of a sudden to me, I recognized, I was in a different room. Where am I at? I don't know where I'm at. And all of a sudden I looked up at the ceiling again. I was laying in the bed, faced up, and the ceiling started coming down to me. From my perspective, the ceiling was coming down. Well, it wasn't coming down. I was going up. The ceiling was getting closer and closer. The ceiling wasn't moving. I was moving out. My spirit came up and out of my body. Then when I was up a certain height, different level, all of a sudden I went down, boom, to the foot of the bed. I turned around and I looked back in the bed, and we'll just assume the bed was going this way now for the sake of the looking at. I looked in the bed, and there underneath the blankets was the figure of somebody's feet under there. I went a little further and I could look up here a little more, and there was somebody's knees and somebody's hips, somebody's shoulders, and somebody's face. It was my face. My body was in the bed. I was in the bed, but I'm out here. But my body's in there. How can this be? 15 years old, nobody told me about this, see? Nobody told me about what happens when you die. You get the whole thing, well, when you die, you go to heaven. Well, how do you get there? And that's assuming you're a Christian, see? And I didn't know Jesus as my personal Savior. And so what happened, as soon as I recognized my face on that pillow, it was just like, whoom, I just went down through a trap door. Just right out from under me, boom, down I went into darkness, into darkness. Deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into darkness. See, I didn't know what was happening. I'm sitting there thinking, this ain't supposed to happen. I mean, darkness, that doesn't sound like a good place. I was kind of scared of the dark anyway, a young kid, you know. You know when you're little you get scared and the brothers do all kinds of stuff and they trick you and all that different types of stuff and hide in places and then they come out and scare you. And when I was starting to go down into this darkness, man, I had such a feeling of fear on the inside of me. It was causing me just to scream. I started to scream and yell. And I can't explain the horror that came over me. It's unexplainable to tell you the terror that you would feel to be without God and going deeper and deeper and deeper down, down, down. It was like a trip. I could sense it. It was like, you know, I was just going down, 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 down. And I couldn't stop it. I tried. I couldn't stop. All this stuff was just happening to me. I didn't have a choice. It was just happening. And so here we go. I'm screaming, yelling. What is this? Where am I going? What's happening? See, I was taught and given information. And that information for me, to be good and go to heaven, was I was infant baptized. I went to confirmation. I attended vacation Bible school. I had First Communion. I did all the things I was told to do, you know. I was a member of a church. My name was on the membership list. I attended church. Man, when the doors were open for church, man, I was there. My folks were there. They loved Jesus. And yet they didn't know that I didn't know Jesus as my personal Savior. See, I knew all about God. Man, I memorized verses. I was in vacation Bible school. Man, you get stars when you memorize verses, right? Anybody been there? Yeah. I attended Sunday school. I had, you know, the wreath. I had the pin. I had the wreath, and I had all those little things, hanging down things that said 4th year, 5th year, 6th year, perfect attendance. I had all that stuff. And yet, when I got sick and I died, my spirit left my body, I went down. I was given wrong information. And so I couldn't make a right choice, a right decision. And so the outcome now was going to be the wrong outcome. It's not the one that I wanted. How many of us here, how many of us around in this community area, how many in the world have gotten wrong information? Yeah. How many in the church are sitting in the church with wrong information today? And they haven't made that personal decision for Jesus Christ themselves. Maybe they've done all the things that their spiritual leaders have told them. But it's the wrong information. Yeah. Now, why would those spiritual leaders tell us the wrong information? Because their spiritual leaders told them the same information. And why would those leaders tell those leaders the wrong information? Because their spiritual leaders told them. And they were taught and trained in the same information. And it's passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation. Perhaps in some churches for 500 to 1,000 years, the same information is passed down. And in this instance, for me, from my perspective, it was wrong information. I didn't make that step of accepting Jesus in my heart. And now the result was hell. The result was darkness. The result was when I died at 15, I was going down, 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 down. And so here I'm progressing down. I can see like the lights of earth up here anyway. It was just foggy and hazy. It's just you couldn't hardly see anything. It wasn't clear. Nothing was clear. Just foggy, hazy, just going. All you knew is that you're going down, down, down. It was lighter up there, but it's dark here. And you think just at the darkest time, it can't get any darker, then you just progress down deeper and you go darker. And the fear was just overwhelming. The horror was overwhelming. Sometimes I try and explain it about a trick my brother played on me. We lived out on the farm, and we had our bedrooms, my brother's and ours was upstairs. And so he asked me one time, we were watching TV, and he asked me a favor, would you go up in my room and get something? So I said, okay. And that was an oddity too, you know. The younger brother, well, you know, go get this? Nah, I'm not going to do nothing for you. You know, the brotherly love thing, you know, that goes on. But anyway, so I said, yeah, I'll go up and get it. So I went up and ran up the steps, and I went up there, and I had the light on in the stairway, and then I went around, and I was going to come into his room. And in his room, the light switch wasn't a switch. It was a pull string in the middle of the room. And so I was a young kid. This happened when I was really young. And so I was at times real scared of the dark. And so I opened up the door, creaks open, you know, that type of thing. And then you go in, and then you looking around over here and over there, and pretty soon you get to the middle, and you got your hand over here because you want to make sure the door stays open, you know, and then you click on the light, right? And so then I went and got the light on. Oh, I feel a lot better now. So then I go and I get the stuff, and I go over and I click on the light to turn it off, and man, whoom, I'm right to the door right now, you know, that type of deal. And when you turn around, it's like, you got to get out of the room, you know, that type of thing. Sometimes you get scared. Well, I had a reason to be a little bit, because if you stayed in that room, you know, I slept at night when I was a little kid. I haven't really told anybody this too much, but when you stayed in the room, all of a sudden the door was over here. I was in the bed, and the door would start to go close. And then for about 5-10 minutes, it'd stay like that. And then all of a sudden, it would go back open again. Well, that's kind of spooky, ain't it? Yeah? Yeah, little kids are sitting under the covers, and I'm sitting watching that door go, whoop, stays there a while, and whoop, goes back, and I'm going, all right, who's doing that? Anybody out there? No, nobody was out there. You know, it makes you want to look under the bed or something. Well, I didn't find out until later on. Guess what? The hot air register was behind the door. Yeah. And so whenever the furnace turned on in the wintertime, then it blew the door partway shut. Sounds simple now, but man, it wasn't back then, I tell you. It wasn't simple. So anyway, I was a little spooked out in that room. Well, anyway, so I got the stuff, I turned out the light, got to the door, and I come to the door down by the steps, and I turn around, and I just get my hand on the railing to go down the steps, and all of a sudden my brother, which I didn't know, this was a plan. He had snuck up the stairway before, went in another room, and just when I'm coming to the stairway to go back down, he comes up behind me, and he goes, "Whoo!" Did you feel it? I saw you jump. And all of a sudden my stomach goes, whoa! And my knees just buckle. And the only thing that saved me from rolling down those 13 steps was I had my hand on the handrail. And of course, my brothers laughing. You know, that was funny. My point is, you know how you feel a little bit? Can you understand how I feel? The fear that hits you, like right there? That was what I was feeling like, going down, 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 down. Except it wasn't a burst of fear. It was total, 100% of the time, fear. It's horrible. It was horrible. Horrific. Well, there's a reality of hell. See, that's the second thing. There's a reality. I was going down, 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 deep, deep, deeper into hell. There is a heaven. There is a hell. Now, the one good thing about it, when I found out there was a hell and the reality of hell, I also know that there's a reality of heaven. Amen? And for us as believers, man, that's good news. See? That's good news, because when we're absent from the body, we're going to be present with the Lord. That type of thing as a Christian that's asked Jesus in their heart. But I wasn't told about all this, about the reality of this and that type of thing. I thought I was going to heaven. But see, now a lot of people will say there is no hell. Well, I can tell you, I've been there. There certainly is. You know, there is that reality. If you look, if you have some good common sense and just observing powers, you can see throughout this whole world that God has created a world where there is contrast. Yeah. There's night and there's day. Yeah. There's darkness and there's light. There's wickedness and there is good. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's always the contrast there. If you can't see that, there's something wrong. God did this for a purpose.
Yeah.
He's trying to give you a message. There's hate, there's love. There's rejection, there's acceptance. Do you see that? There's always the opposites. It's an opposite kingdom, see? There's the devil and there's God. There's the kingdom of darkness and hell, and there's the kingdom of Christ, his kingdom, and heaven. See? So there's always the contrast we have to see. We have to know that or understand that. I mean, even people in the remotest area of Australia or Africa, they got to look up and see the stars at night and understand that man didn't create this.
Yeah.
There's somebody bigger than me, see, that did this.
Yeah.
There's a God in heaven that was the creator of all these things. We now know, we saw the other night through the Hubble spacecraft, and I've watched other little videos that they have on there, that they have about, in the Milky Way, what I've been told, there's about 150 million stars. And then if you go outside that, there's about 200 million galaxies, other galaxies out there. And if you go in the whole universe, these are just the ones that we can see right now.
Yeah.
And then the other night we saw a picture of where the Hubble spacecraft, or the telescope, focused on a dark area of space and just left it there. They said, well, there's nothing out there, it's just kind of deadness. So they left it there for what, 2-3 days? And just left it focused on that and took a picture on that, and it gave it time for the light to come back. And how many billions of galaxies and stars? It was just enormous. You got to know that man didn't do this. There's a God in heaven that did this. And it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
There's a plan here.
Yeah.
God's got a plan. And you're a part of it.
Yeah. Exactly.
So here I am in darkness, horror, fear. Well, I finally got down. And I got down deeper and down to the bottom where I was going, and I stopped. And when I got down to the bottom, it was like I could sense over here that there was just like the most wicked, horrible entity, whatever you want to call it, we hear about is going to heaven. And there was only like back, even about 10, 15 years ago, there was only like 3-4 people that I knew of that actually literally went to hell and came back. So I'm sitting there all freaked out myself about this box and this containment thing, and I was putting in this storage area, and then he put the box over and like it was like a warehouse area, and there I sat. And I'm going, what is happening? Where am I at? And I didn't, this is a weird thing, I didn't feel dead. When my spirit came out of my body, I felt alive. I mean, the worst thing I was feeling was fear. I didn't feel sick. I felt alive. And we know that our spirit man is going to live forever. Did you know that? Once you were created, once you were started, once God put his spirit on the inside of you and you were created, you're going to live forever. You're going to live forever. You're going to live forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Not in the same condition, not functioning the same, because, you know, when you get so old and Jesus doesn't come back, hasn't come back as of yet, then your body's going to wear out and it's going to die. And then your body goes in the grave, but your spirit man, your soulish area aspects, that goes into to be in the presence of the Lord, into paradise actually, where it starts. So anyway, I was all freaked out about this box deal. And so I heard it back in the 90s, I heard this one man, Dr. Richard Eby, and he was on a Christian television station, and they were interviewing him. And the reason why was because that he died at one point in time as a Christian, and when he died, his spirit went up into heaven. And so they wanted to hear about the story. Well, his story was that he was in another state, he had gone out and he was helping one of his family members move. And so he was up on a second-story balcony, and he was moving boxes, furniture, and all this type of stuff, but then he took a time out, and he was up there on there, and he leaned on a railing. And little did he know, the railing wouldn't support him, and boom, off he went of this balcony, down in to some bushes, went through the bushes, and his head went splat, like that, right on the curb. And he was suspended in the bushes. He said in his testimony, he says, I was in a perfect position, my head down at the bottom, my head cracked open, and it just emptied all the blood out of my body. They called, the emergency crew. They came, they got him, put him in the hospital, and the doctors looked at him. They had him on the pumps, with the respirators and all that stuff, and all trying to keep his heart beating and that type of thing. But the doctors came back, and they pulled the curtain on him and told his wife, no, he's gone. Can't do anything about it. And then all of a sudden, an electrical storm hit a transformer, and boom, all the electricity was out of the hospital. And everything shut down, at least for about 20 seconds. And then all the generators come back up on, and this makes the emergency doctor, he just, got all excited. He's got to take care of his other patients. And so they just pulled the curtain on Dr. Eby and pulled the curtain on him, and he went to go look at all of his other patients to make sure that they were going to make it, because there was no help for him. He was already dead. And so what the excitement and all the confusion it caused there, when they pulled the curtain, nobody went back in there again because they knew he was dead, so they left on all the respirators. They left on all the machines, the heart pump and the lungs and the air and all that stuff, so he was still getting all this to his body. But his body was gone with blood. He didn't have any blood in it. And what happened is that he went up into heaven, and he said, it's the most exciting, most beautiful, peaceful place you've ever seen. He starts to explain it. Man, you should read what he has. Find his books, Dr. Richard Eby, and read about what he says about heaven. We don't think about heaven enough.
Yeah, that's true.
We don't think about it. He said up there, he said in this paradise, place of paradise where he went, he said it had rolling hills, it had trees up in the distance, he said, and there was a river that ran through it, and he said the grass was flowing, and he said the grass was up and high, and the little breeze of wind would come, and it would just flow like this, and the tree limbs and the leaves would all flow like that, and it was just like everything had music to it. It was just music all over, he said. I couldn't see any stereo or anything like that, but it was just all music, he said, just wonderful place. And the light, he said, there was no sun, no moon, there was no need of it. He said, the glory of God just filled the place. The glory of God just filled it. And the one man that was interviewing him said, well, did you see the Father? Did you see the throne room? And he said, no. That's not what it says in the Bible. It's going to happen right away. See, before I get there, he even wanted some flowers. He looked down, and there's all kinds of flowers around him. I'm going to back up a little bit. There's all kinds of flowers around him. And so he goes, wow, those are beautiful flowers. And he was a horticulturist, too, hobby that he had. And so he was going to reach down and get some of a bouquet of flowers, and all of a sudden, instantly, within his hand, he had the flowers. And he smelled them, and he said, you couldn't believe it. I couldn't tell you all the differences in the variety of smells or fragrance and that was there. It was just way beyond any imagination that we could think of. And he said, besides them, the colors too, the same thing. He said the flowers and the colors, he said you couldn't imagine all the spectrum of colors that were there. He said it was so beautiful and it was so peaceful. That was the big thing. He was so much at peace there. And he said it's a wonderful place. He spoke to the Lord. And as soon as he had a question for the Lord, immediately, boom, the answer would come back. But the first thing that Jesus would always tell him is this. When he asked him a question, then the Lord would say, didn't you read my book? It's in my book. The answer is in the book that I gave you, that I sent to you. But I'll tell the answer. So then he would tell him the answer to the question. And then a little bit later, Dr. Eby, he had a chance for another one. He said, hey, what about this and this and this? And then Jesus just looked at him and just said, didn't you read my book? The answer's in the book. And then he gave him the answer to his question. He did this over and over again. So when he got back down here on earth, he said, I've made up my mind. I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to title it, Didn't You Read My Book? So that's the title. You look for that book. And so he was up in heaven. And then the man that was interviewing him again came and said, well, didn't you see the throne room? And he said, no. He said, no. What the Bible says is when a person, a believer, dies on earth, he is transported up into paradise. And when he gets up into paradise where it's peaceful, the whole thing, everything, all your wants, needs, desires are covered right there. He said, you wait for a time. You wait for a time of what? When? What's the Bible say? It says there's going to come a day when Jesus comes back, and who's going to rise first? The dead in Christ, those that have died and their bodies are in the grave here on earth, their bodies are going to rise up and their bodies are going to become glorified, and it's going to meet in heaven with the soul and the spirit of the person there, and they're all going to be one containment, one bride, and this bride is going to be brought before the Father, and Jesus is going to present the bride to his Father. Isn't that right?
Yep.
Is that what you read? Yeah. And so that's when everybody is gathered together. The ones living on earth, the ones that have died on earth, and their spirits here, and they all are gathered together one time. Because otherwise, it would be like whenever a Christian died, Jesus would have to introduce them to the Father. I mean, it'd just be consistently happening all the time because there's so many people that die every second. There's a website out there I'd seen some years ago. They had about 6 billion people, a world population at the time. It's about 6.3 now. But they had a little clock that was ticking. And the clock was ticking every second, every second, 5 people were born. Every second, 3 people die. So we have a gain of 2 every second on this earth. Now, some of those numbers might have changed because this was a few years back I got this or saw this. 3 people step into eternity every second. So since I started talking in that amount of time, there's a little over 5,000 people that went into eternity. I wonder if any of them were your friends. I wonder if any of them were mine. Were there any family members? Was there anybody I knew? It gets a little more serious now, doesn't it? See? Life is serious.
Yeah.
People are making choices out there all the time. The choices between heaven and hell, between Jesus and no Jesus, between Jesus and the devil. Actually, that kingdom. Every second. Every second. By the time we get done here in a little bit, it'll be 10,000 people will step into eternity. And for us as believers, we have a job, we have a call, we have a purpose. We must seek the lost and to bring them to a knowledge of Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. See, Peter, I think it's in 1 Peter 3:9, it talks about that God doesn't desire anyone. He doesn't desire anyone to die without Christ. He says, but he wants everyone to come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And he wants that for you. If you don't know Christ here tonight, he wants that for you. He wants that for you. So anyway, there's heaven. Dr. Richard Eby. Take a look at it. Fantastic time. And so then while he's up there, of course, we should finish a little bit of the story. He was told that it's not your time yet. I want you to go back. Jesus told him, it's not your time yet. You're going to go back down on this earth, and you're going to tell people what you saw up here. You're going to tell them about heaven. And you're going to tell them how to get there. And so he went back, went down into his body, and the doctors couldn't believe it. And I won't tell you the rest of the story because that's his story, but I wanted to tell you that little piece. Because a little bit later, 2 years later, he was over in Israel, and he was going over there for a trip, and he went down on a tour, and on this tour, bus tour, they took a peek at what they believe to be Lazarus' grave. And so he went into Lazarus' grave, and up there's a door at the top, and you got to go down steps way down to the bottom, and there's one little light down at the bottom. And nobody else on the bus wanted to go there, but he said, I paid for the tour, I'm going to see everything. So he said, okay. So he went down there, and everybody else stayed on the air-conditioned bus. And so he went down there. When he got down to the bottom, for some odd reason or whatever the situation, that little light bulb that was the only light for him in the whole area there went pop. And he was in total darkness. He fell down to his knees so he wouldn't fall into the water. There's a little stream of water going down the side of the steps, and so he didn't want to get in the water. So he went down to his knees, and the Lord spoke to him and said, now I'm going to show you hell. And so he took him down into hell, and he said this, and I was listening. Boy, I tell you, on TV, I was listening now. Man, I hear about another man that saw hell. I'm going to listen to see what he said. And so he was going, he said it was like a trip. He said, we go down, 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 down. When I got down to the bottom, he said, this evil presence came and put me in a box. he had my attention. I was listening. He said, in this box, he said there were all kinds of snakes, lizards, creepy things, bugs, spiders, all the junk that you're scared of. You know what I mean? All the stuff that perhaps you're fearful of. And it was just crawling all over him. All over in his face, his eyes, nose, in, out, every place on his body. He couldn't do a thing about it. He was restrained. He was confined. He said, I was screaming, I was hollering. He said, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here. I'm not supposed to be here. And all they did, these spirits, what was there, these demonic spirits that were coming in the shape and form of these snakes and different things that was attacking him, all they did was laugh. They just laughed at him. They just laughed and said, ha ha ha, you believed us. You believed us when we said there was no Jesus. You believed us when we deceived you and lied to you about what to do to obtain salvation. You believed us. And now you're going to be here forever with us. Can you imagine being in that box with that slimy, demonic activity forever?
Yeah.
That's what hell is like. Without God. Horror. Terror. Then after that, the Lord picked him up out of there, and all of a sudden, boom, he was up in Lazarus' grave again. And he was talking to the Lord about this, and he said, man, I couldn't believe it, how long I was down there. It was just like hours and hours and hours. I was down there. I couldn't hardly take it. And the Lord said, you were down there about 30 seconds. And I had to take you out of there, or your brains would have gone nuts with the pressure and the pain that you were feeling. Can you imagine what that's like?
No. No.
We can't. The horror, the terror of being there. Now, I didn't have all the slimy stuff on me and stuff like that, but I was in that box, and all the horror and the terror of being without God was on me. Now, do you want anybody to go to hell?
No.
I wouldn't want, listen to this now, I wouldn't want my worst enemy to go to hell. This is something that needs to encourage us. It needs to drive us to tell other people about Jesus so they don't have to go there either. See, that's one of the callings and plans that God has for us. The epitome of our life is not to get saved and know Jesus so we can go to heaven. That's selfish.
Yeah.
That's just plain selfish. It's the first step. That's where we got to get, because we have to have Jesus in our hearts before we can go and help other people to get Jesus in their heart. That's the way that works, don't it? I can't give you something I don't have. Right? So then, and it's not me that gives it. You understand what I'm saying? But when I have Jesus in my heart, now I can relate it to you. That type of thing. So that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do. Seek and save the lost. And we have to have a heart for it. Now he knew heaven and hell. Now Jesus said, to him that now you're going to tell people about heaven and you're going to tell them about hell. And so Dr. Eby had gotten put in a box. Boy, did that help me to understand a little bit about hell, because I was wondering what in the world is this place that I was in at the age of 15. Because see, when this happened, when I came back into my body, I told them, and they were asking me, what happened? Where'd you go? What happened, man? You were just like gone and all that type of stuff. And I said, I saw Jesus. And I couldn't tell them hardly anything else, because it was so private to me. It was so intimate. And also it was so wondering. I was wondering what this was, what that was, all these different things that I experienced. I couldn't explain it. And so if I was going to tell them that I went down into darkness and I was put in a box, they're probably going to think, well, he isn't quite well enough yet, is he? I think we're going to keep him in here a little bit longer, except we'll take him out of this one and maybe put him in the psych ward, over here. So I didn't say anything. I didn't tell anybody about this experience for a long, long time. Even after I went back to high school and stuff like that, a lot of the kids in high school, they didn't know what happened. They just knew that I was sick and I was out of high school for about 2.5 months. I didn't tell anybody for a long, long time what had happened. And then as I got older and that type of thing, I started to share a little bit, little pieces here and there. And then finally, you know, as I grew and matured and as I got saved and things like that, then the Lord started telling me, now go out and tell people. Go out and tell people what happened to you. And that's what we're doing. So anyway, here I was in this box. I had to get out. I couldn't stay there. I was 15 years old. I had a lot of life to live. Man, I got all of my life ahead of me. You know, I've got a family and I got a wife and I got all these things I need to do and to find. You know, that type of thing. And I just struggled when I was within this box. I was just fighting to get out, get out, get out. I got to get out. And I don't know how I did, but I got out. And so I ran out, and it was like I was running through alleyways, dark areas, tall buildings. Remember, I could only see up 4 or 5 stories, and just running down through the alleyways. And then all during this time, this evil, dark presence was running after me. And I was just booking it as fast as I could, man. I was just going. And then he caught me again. And he brought me back to another place. And this happened, and I have to skip through some stuff here for sake of time and things, but this happened 2 times that he caught, and I got loose, and then he caught me again. And the 3rd time I got loose, I was running again, going down through the darkness and foggy areas. I couldn't see where I was at, and I was running. I had this terrible, horrible fear and horror that was upon me, and I just kept on running. And I knew I had to get out of there. I just had to get, I don't know where, but I'm going. And so then what took place is I saw over off in the distance and up higher, I saw like a light up there. And I saw a light, and I go, the first thing you think, man, when you're in darkness and you see a light, man, that's where you want to go. And so I was headed for this light, and I kept on going, running. Now the funny thing about it, and I didn't think about it at the time, but I never got tired running. You know how when you run now, if I'd run a block right now, I'd be huffing and puffing and, you know, tired. Well, I just kept on running, because I was in the spirit, see? I wasn't in my body. And man, but I was just going, reaching for that out there, that light. And when I got up by the light, I stopped, and I just stopped here, and it was like a building that was there. And it was a big, long building. It was white, and I could see over here was the double doors. So I started walking over there. The one thing I noticed immediately when I got there, all the fear left. I was at peace. Man, I tell you, when fear gets on you, you know, it's just like it's a heavy, heavy weight. It's just a horrible thing on you. I don't know if you've experienced that to maybe a little degree here on this earth, but it was so horrible. But when I got up there, the presence was just so sweet and stuff, and I go, wow, this is fantastic. I like this. And so I was going to walk over here, and I start walking over there, and I come over to where was the front porch. You know, it was like, and I stopped by the steps, and I turned up here, and the double doors were up here. And so I looked over here, and it was like there was pillars, white pillars on the front. And it was a big, nice porch. You know, it was like a southern plantation is the best way I can explain it. It was just a beautiful mansion type of thing. And it was a southern plantation that had the white pillars, and it had a veranda out front. That's what down south they call that veranda. Porch is a veranda. Up here it's just plain old porch. So I go, oh, that's where I want to be. That's where I want to be. So there was the steps, and there was the up on there, and I looked over back where I'd come from a little bit on the porch over in this side, and over there was a man. And he was seated in a high back chair, and he was looking at me. And I was looking at him, and I saw him, man, and he's got this white robe on, and I don't know how to say it, but it was just like it was glistening. It was just like it was flowing. You know, I mean, it was almost like it was moving. It was just, again, I can't explain this. It was just like it had motion to it, and it was glistening, and it had a life to it, you know, that type of thing. I don't know how to explain it. And so I looked it down, and I go, wow, you know, and then I looked up, and I saw this man that was there, and he had longer hair on, and then I looked a little bit more closer, and all of a sudden, boom, I looked into his eyes. And I go, oh, my God. I said, that's Jesus. It's Jesus. And then he looked at me. And when he looked at me, his eyes just like pierced right down through my eyes. You know, it says in the scripture that your eye is the light of the soul. And it's just like he could look and pierce right down through my eyes and see my whole heart. And when he did, oh man, I felt unworthy. I just felt like, oh man, he knows all the junk I've done. He knows all the stuff. But I never felt rejection. All I could feel from him is love. Love that pierced. through my heart. You know, I had one man in Omaha one time, he listened to the testimony, and after the testimony he came up and he talked to me and he said, well, a lot of people don't know it, but I was on the surgery table some years ago, and I died. And I went to heaven and I saw Jesus. And he had a long story, a good story, about what happened and that type of thing. And so he said, I just wanted to come because I heard you had died and gone to hell, but you'd seen Jesus. And I talked to a lot of people, he said. You know, he was right and blunt to the point guy, you know, that type of thing, the way he talked. And so I said, I've talked to a lot of people, and they said they've had a vision of Jesus here and a vision of Jesus here and that type of thing. And so I just want to ask you, what's the most remarkable thing about Jesus that you noticed? Well, I said, nobody's ever asked me that before. Anyway, I gave it a second, and I just started to think about it, and I go, oh, that's easy when I think about it. It's his eyes. It's his eyes. When I looked into his eyes, it was just like, although they were like fire at first when I saw them, and then when I looked longer, it was just like, I don't know how to explain it, it's just like pure love poured out of his eyes to us, to me. It's hard to describe again some of the things I experienced. And so I was telling that to this man from Omaha, and again, he was blunt to the point, and he looked at me and he goes, yep, you've seen him. And he takes off. He starts walking over here. He said, that's what I saw too. All these other people, they tell you about Jesus, and they tell you all about it, what he wore and what he looked like, and all these times, what he was wearing, what he wasn't wearing, and all these different things, and they can't tell you nothing, but when you tell me about his eyes, I know you saw him. Eyes of love. Just wait to that time when you first gaze into his face. It's going to be a fantastic time. So anyway, he was seated there, and I was still over here by the steps, and I was looking at him over in the chair. And so he started speaking to me, and he spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand. Maybe it was a heavenly language, you know. I don't know. Maybe it was tongues. I don't know what it was, but it was a heavenly language I couldn't understand. And the words came out of his mouth like in 3D. They were like blocks. I could see them, you know, like the little blocks. The only way I can explain it to you, it wasn't like this, but it was like this. Like those little blocks that kids have, you know, and they came out of his mouth, and they came over there, and they came over, and all of a sudden, boom, they'd hit me in my heart. Peace just flooded me. I thought I was at peace. Remember, the terror left, the fear left, and I thought I was at peace standing there. And the more he spoke and the more words came boom, 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 boom into my heart, the more peace just engulfed me. And then when he got done, he was finished. I don't know what it was. I've asked, and the best I can come with, and people that mature Christians that I've asked about this, they felt that he was speaking prophetically to me. Perhaps my future. Perhaps he was telling me how much he loves me and cares for me. And so what happened next was that he did speak to me, and he said in English, what I could understand, he said, let's say the 23rd Psalm together. And so I knew that one. Man, good choice, man. I know that one. Vacation Bible School. Thank you, Jesus. And so Psalm 23. So I started to say that. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yeah. He'll lead me beside the still waters. He'll restore my soul. Oh, restore my soul. I needed some of that. My brain was fried. I needed restoring. And then it says a little bit later down in the scripture, it says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's what his plan is for us, see? Yeah. One day. But until that day, we've got a job to do.